Hi, my name's Sadie Tierney, and this week I'm going to look at some wash techniques with you, which you can apply to watercolour, but you could also use with gouache and acrylic if you have them. So I'm going to take a simple still life group as a starting point, and I'm going to do a quick recap on ellipses and perspective, which I know you've already been taught, just to get the drawing structure. I will then look at a couple of techniques that you could use whilst you're applying watercolour, floating and masking. I'm going to be using 3 colours, and I recommend that you do the same. It's a good challenge, and you can have a recap on the colour wheel and the colour studies that you've already made. I'm actually going to be using very watered down acrylic instead of watercolour. It's just what I have. The paint behaves in exactly the same way. The only difference is that acrylic dries waterproof and light fast, and you have the option to paint thickly using a method called impasto, which is more akin to oil paint, but I'm not going to be painting it with it in this way. So here I'm going to use it just like watercolour in transparent washes and glazes. I was just thinking about ellipses. So I'm just going to demonstrate floating pigment. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to flood the area that I want to float the pigment in with water. Plain water here. I'm painting the grapefruit in the front of my composition. All of this fruit is the last fruit we've got that I've put together in a still life composition with some lovely strong directional sunlight from the garden coming in at an angle. Okay, so I've flooded that area. I'm using white Somerset satin paper, 100% cotton. So I'm just going to take a little bit of yellow at this point and just float it in. So I'm not actually really painting with it, I'm just dotting it into areas that I want it to be this colour. And I'm going to take some orange now that I've mixed, using red and a nice blood red I've got, and some yellow. Trying to get some of the shadows working just using the pigment, and you can see it floats right to the edge of where I've put the water in, and then it doesn't go beyond that. So just some more floating pigment into here. Once that's dry, I'll work on top of it and add some more detail. Lovely way of getting some quite nice random things going on, random marks. Oh, that's rather lovely. Just looks like the lovely pottery bowl from Fay George Ceramics. I'm looking at this glass jar, and I'm just wanting to recap on that, because if you look here, it's almost a circle when you're looking down on it. So as your eye level rises, that becomes almost a full circle here, and then as your eye goes up, it becomes much more squashed. And then if you're looking right from below, I don't know if I can get this angle quite, that the line starts to go up if you're right underneath it. So just to demonstrate in the drawing of that vase, the base of it, from where my eye point is, my viewpoint, is very circular indeed. So if I carried on the circle, which I can't really see because of the flowers, it would be almost a full circle. Hopefully you can see that. And then by the time it's got to the top, it's a lot more squashed. And if the vase carried on even further up to my eye level, it would be fully horizontal, totally straight. And then it would start to go up the other way. So this is the front of the vase here. And this is the front of the bottom. Just put the rest of it in so we get an idea. So the main point to remember is that this bit that you're looking down on is much, much more circular than the bit which is closer to your eye level, which becomes a squashed ellipse. Also, just looking at the lines of perspective that I've put in on the table here, are running away to a vanishing point, which is somewhere in the middle of my garden, and that's the whole of the table as well, that converges into one point perspective somewhere at the back of my garden. So I'm going to be trying to put that into my drawing as well. So the paper I use is always acid free, so it's made of cotton. It's not made with wood pulp. Wood pulp contains acid and it yellows the paper over time. So I use a paper called Somerset Satin generally, which is actually a printmaking paper, and it's been internally sized, unlike some watercolour papers, which means that when the paper is mixed around in the vat, when the pulp is mixed up with the water, the size goes in with it rather than being on the surface. So this is the paper I use, Somerset Satin. It's got a very smooth surface, and it's handmade using a large a cylinder which spins and makes it on a roll. So this is the edge, the decal here. I don't know if you can see that. So that's the edge of the roll, and the torn edge here is where it's ripped by hand into sheets and sold, packed and sold. That Somerset Satin is very smooth to paint and print on, which I love. This is Somerset cold pressed paper. So the satin has been hot pressed, which means that a hot metal drum has been passed over the paper in production and made a very, very smooth surface using the heat. A cold press obviously has not used heat; it's just used the cylinder to make more of a rough surface. So I'm not sure if you can see that in the camera. I'll just see if I can show it with a bit of pastel. It's got a bit of a tooth to it, if you can see that. The other thing is I generally use a fairly heavyweight paper, so mine is 300 grams. This is a lighter paper. This is a watercolour paper. Another one from the same mill, actually. It's called Saunders, and this has been sized on the surface because it's a watercolour paper, so it will repel the paint a little bit more than a printmaking paper. It's not quite so absorbent. This is 190, so it's quite reasonably flimsy. Computer paper is about 90, and this one is 300, which is the weight that I tend to use, which holds paint very well. And then you can really blow the budget and use 425 grams. This is, it's lovely and thick, almost like card. That's got a lovely surface to it too. So these are watercolour papers, and I demonstrated the printmaking paper. The other thing that I think about is how I store or frame the prints and paintings, because obviously if you're using 100% cotton archival material, you want it to last, so you have to think about how you store it, making sure that it's in completely archival conditions. And I always use acid-free mounts, museum board, which is also 100% cotton, and I float mount generally my my paintings using hinges made with Japanese paper and wheat paste, or an archival gum tape, but never conventional mount board that you just buy in a, I don't know, in the range or something, because it's got acid in it and it will degrade the edges of your paper and your painting. Okay, so if you go into an art shop and purchase some watercolour paints, you'll see a range of greys available to buy. Payne's grey is a common one that people buy. That's quite a blue grey. Davies grey, different types of grey. I like to mix my greys myself because I know then what colours have gone into it, and then obviously you can harmonise with the rest of your painting, knowing exactly which blue went into your grey. So I'm just going to show you a simple technique I use for mixing greys and blacks. I'm going to take complementary colours, so you might remember that from your colour wheels. So I'm going to use a green and a red. So I'm using a kind of phthalo green here, and quite a pink red, carmine magenta red here, mixed together, get a lovely purple. So I'm just going to add in a tiny bit more green to that, and the trick is to get a balance between the two complementaries. I'm fairly happy with that. I'm just going to try it out. Beautiful. And obviously you can lighten that down using much more water, and you could make it darker as well if you wanted more of a black. I'll just make a slightly darker one. Oh, that's quite green, so I'm just going to add a tiny bit more red to it. Lovely. I'm just going to demonstrate with another couple of complementaries, so I'm going to use an orange and a blue. So here's my orange, and a blue. So that's still a touch on the warm side, so I'm just going to cool it down with a tiny bit more blue. There. So you can see a different shade of grey achieved using orange and blue. Two more complementaries. So I hope you enjoyed the video and trying out some painting techniques. Please feel free to email us images that you've made for any feedback, or post up on the WhatsApp group. And I look forward to seeing you again soon.